Have you ever realized you were erased from your own family before anyone bothered to tell you? I was standing in my kitchen when I found out. Not through a confession, not through an argument, but through a silence so deliberate it felt rehearsed. I'm Elaine Whitmore. I was 62 that winter, living alone in a cedar-sided house outside Asheville, North Carolina. The house my late husband and I bought when our son was still small enough to fall asleep on my shoulder. The house I kept alive long after David died, long after my knees started aching in the cold, long after my life became centered around helping everyone else survive theirs. Thanksgiving was 3 days away. The turkey was already thawing in the sink. I had taken out my grandmother's china that morning, the one with the faint gold trim, chipped in exactly one place because my son Andrew dropped it when he was 12. I remember that because I told him it was fine. It was always fine. The phone rang while I was peeling apples. It wasn't Andrew. That should have been the first warning. It was my sister-in-law, Carol. We'd never been close, but her voice carried a strange hesitation that made my stomach tighten before she even finished saying hello. "Elaine," she said, "I don't know how to say this without upsetting you." I laughed softly. "At my age," I said, "it takes effort to surprise me." She paused. Then she said, "I assumed Andrew told you about Thanksgiving." The apple slipped from my hand and hit the sink with a dull thud. "Told me what?" Another pause. Longer this time. "They're hosting at Melissa's parents' place this year. Big dinner, extended family. They already sent out the invites." I waited. I don't know why. Maybe I expected my name to appear at the end of that sentence like an afterthought. It didn't. Carol cleared her throat. "I just thought you should know. I'd hate for you to show up and..." "Show up where?" She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. After I hung up, I stood there staring at the apple skin curling at my feet. My hands were shaking, but my face felt oddly calm, like my body was protecting me from understanding something too big all at once. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Andrew would call. He always did when he needed something. He didn't call that day, or the next. On the third day, the bank notification came through on my phone. $57,000. That was how much had been charged to my credit line over the last 2 months. Luxury hotels, designer stores, a travel agency I had never used in my life. Paris. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I logged into my account with trembling fingers, scrolling transaction after transaction, each one stamped with dates that lined up perfectly with the weeks Andrew and Melissa had been struggling. Rent shortfall, unexpected expenses, temporary setback. That was what they had called it when they asked me for help. They never asked about Paris. When Andrew finally answered my call that evening, his voice was distracted, like I'd interrupted something important. "Mom, can this wait?" I asked him about the charges. Silence. Then a sigh. "Melissa handled that," he said. "It's under control." Under control. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, my chest burning. "You used my account. You said we could rely on you, Mom. That's what family does." That was the moment something cracked open inside me. Not shattered, not exploded, cracked. Because I realized this wasn't sudden. It wasn't impulsive. It had been planned, justified, normalized. I wasn't their mother. I was their resource. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, listening to the old clock tick, replaying moments I had brushed aside for years. The way Melissa smiled without warmth. The way Andrew avoided my eyes when money came up. The way holidays slowly shifted away from my home without explanation. I wasn't excluded by accident. I was being phased out. And I hadn't even reached the worst part yet. I found out I was officially erased from my own family at a Christmas party I wasn't invited to. The photos appeared online 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. A mansion I'd never seen. A tree taller than my ceiling, dripping in crystal ornaments. Andrew in a tailored suit. Melissa in a red dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage. And there they were, smiling, laughing, toasting. Under one caption, "Family is everything." I stared at that sentence until my vision blurred. That was the night I stopped crying quietly. I cried the way you do when something final sinks in. When your body realizes before your mind catches up that the life you thought you were living has already ended. A week later, my lawyer called. I hadn't told him everything yet. I'd only asked him to review my estate documents, the same ones I had updated after David died. A routine check, I said. Elaine, he told me gently, there's been an amendment filed. I didn't understand the words at first. Filed by whom? He hesitated. Your son, as co-executor. There's a document here naming him primary beneficiary and restructuring the trust. My throat went dry. I never authorized that. He went quiet. Elaine, the signature is yours. I laughed, a sharp, broken sound. It isn't. We both knew what that meant. Forgery, manipulation, a hidden truth that explained everything. I hung up and walked through my house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the photos. Proof of a life I had built with love and patience and loyalty. And proof that someone had decided it was theirs now. That afternoon, Melissa showed up unannounced. She stood in my doorway with practiced concern, her hands folded just right, her eyes already measuring the room. I heard you were upset, she said. I asked her how long. How long what? How long you've been taking from me. She didn't deny it. She smiled faintly, like I was being difficult. You don't need all this, Elaine. You're comfortable. Andrew has a future. I asked if she thought excluding me from holidays was part of that future. She shrugged. You make things tense. That was when I understood. They didn't think they were cruel. They thought they were efficient. I told her to leave. She did. But not before saying one last thing that echoed in my head long after the door closed. You should be grateful we let you stay involved at all. That night, I called my lawyer back. And this time, I didn't ask for clarification. I asked for a plan. Because if they thought quietly removing me from my own life would be painless, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The first thing I did was stop apologizing to myself. I had spent weeks replaying every conversation, every decision, asking where I went wrong. That night, sitting across from my lawyer in his quiet office downtown, I finally asked the only question that mattered. How do I protect myself? His name was Richard Hale. Late 50s, calm voice. The kind of man who didn't interrupt you even when you were rambling, because he understood that people only rambled when they were bleeding inside. He didn't sugarcoat anything. Elaine, what your son and daughter-in-law did is serious. Forgery, financial abuse, manipulation of estate documents. If you want, we can pursue criminal charges. The word criminal echoed in my head like a gunshot. I thought of Andrew as a boy. Grass-stained knees, crooked smile. The way he used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. I shook my head slowly. Not yet. Richard nodded, as if he had expected that answer. Then we start, quietly. We reverse everything. Lock down accounts, revoke powers, rewrite the will. And we do it without them knowing until it's done. That last sentence sent a strange chill through me. Quietly. For the first time in months, I felt something other than grief or anger. Control. Over the next 10 days, I became someone my family would not recognize. I changed passwords, froze credit lines, moved assets into a newly created trust with airtight terms. I appointed a professional trustee Andrew would never charm or intimidate. Every document I signed felt like reclaiming a piece of my spine. I stopped answering Andrew's calls. He noticed quickly. His messages shifted tone by the hour. First confusion, then irritation, then concern, then anger. Mom, this isn't funny. Why aren't you responding? Melissa is worried about you. We need to talk. This is getting ridiculous. I let them pile up unanswered, like unopened bills. The real test came the morning my bank flagged a transaction attempt. Someone tried to withdraw $20,000 from an account that no longer allowed it. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Andrew's voice was sharp, stripped of warmth. What did you do? I said nothing. Mom, you moved things around without telling us. That single word told me everything. I told him I'd call back when I was ready. He didn't like that. Neither did Melissa. She showed up again 2 days later. This time, she didn't bother pretending to be gentle. You blindsided us, she snapped, pacing my living room like she owned it. We have commitments, payments. You can't just pull the rug out. I sat calmly in my armchair, hands folded, studying her the way you study someone who has finally revealed their true face. You forged my signature, I said. You excluded me from family holidays. You spent my money without consent, she scoffed. We were entitled to it. That word landed heavy. Entitled. I asked her to leave. She leaned forward, eyes cold now. If you do this, Elaine, you'll lose your son. I looked at her, truly looked, and realized something devastatingly simple. I had already lost him. She left without another word. That night, Richard called me. Elaine, he said, there's something else you should know. Andrew and Melissa attempted to refinance their house last month. They used your estate as leverage. I closed my eyes. How much? A lot. The house wasn't just theirs. It was built on me. And now that foundation was gone. I went to bed knowing one thing with absolute clarity. They weren't angry because I had hurt them. They were angry because I had stopped being useful, and the next move would be theirs. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope, hand-addressed in Melissa's careful script. Christmas Eve dinner. Their house. 7 o'clock. I laughed when I read it, not because it was funny, because it was strategic. They needed me seen, smiling, forgiving. The family matriarch restored, a living endorsement that everything was fine. I almost declined. Almost. Instead, I called Richard. Should I go? I asked. He paused, then said, if you're ready. I was. Christmas Eve was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that makes everything feel sharper. I wore a simple navy dress and pearl earrings David had given me decades ago. No drama, no statements. When I arrived, the house was glowing with excess. Lights, music, laughter spilling through the door before it even opened. Andrew froze when he saw me. Then he smiled, too quickly. Mom, you came. Melissa appeared beside him, her expression carefully neutral. Of course I came, I said. It's Christmas. The living room was full. Friends, in-laws, people who didn't know me well enough to notice the tension humming beneath the surface. Dinner was served. Toasts were made. Andrew stood, glass raised, to family, for always being there. The irony nearly made me choke. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, the room quieting out of polite respect. I'd like to say something too, I said softly. Andrew's smile tightened. I spoke calmly, clearly. I talked about love given freely, about trust, about what it means to care for someone without keeping score. I talked about boundaries and consequences. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The room shifted. Melissa's fingers clenched around her wine glass. I ended with a sentence that landed like a bell. Sometimes, I said, the greatest act of love is knowing when to stop enabling harm. Silence. Polite applause followed, unsure and scattered. I sat down. Andrew didn't look at me for the rest of the night. When dessert was served, I stood, gathered my coat, and headed for the door. Andrew followed me into the hallway. What was that? He hissed. Honesty, I said. You embarrassed us. I smiled sadly. No, you embarrassed yourselves. His face hardened. You think you've won something. I met his eyes, steady. I think this is just the beginning. As I stepped into the cold night, my phone buzzed. A message from Richard. It's done. The will is finalized. Assets secured. They can't touch anything. I breathed in the winter air, my heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with resolve. Inside that house, they were still pretending. But the truth had already begun to unravel, and the next chapter would leave no room for denial. If you want me to continue with chapters 5 and 6, say the word. The first voicemail came at 4:30 in the morning. I didn't answer it. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, watching the faint light creep through the trees outside. Sleep had become a shallow thing lately. My mind stayed alert, listening for danger even in silence. By the time the sun rose, there were 7 missed calls. Andrew, Melissa, Andrew again, then Melissa twice in a row. I listened to the last one. Elaine, Melissa said, her voice tight, this is getting out of hand. You don't get to humiliate us and then disappear. You owe us an explanation. I deleted it. An hour later, my neighbor knocked on my door. She held her phone awkwardly, eyes full of concern. Elaine, are you all right? I just saw something online and thought. She turned the screen toward me. It was a post from Melissa. Long, emotional, carefully worded. She wrote about an aging mother-in-law who had become confused, paranoid, increasingly unstable. about sudden financial decisions, about concern for her safety, about a family trying desperately to help but being shut out. The comments were already pouring in. So sad. Prayers for your family. Dementia is heartbreaking. You're doing the best you can. I felt something inside my chest go very still. This was the escalation. I thanked my neighbor and closed the door. Then I called Richard. They're trying to discredit me, I said. I know, he replied calmly. I expected this. He told me Andrew and Melissa had already contacted him indirectly, fishing for information, trying to see what I knew, how far I'd gone. They also filed a petition yesterday. For what? Emergency conservatorship. The word hit hard. They were trying to legally declare me incompetent, to take control. Richard continued. They're claiming cognitive decline, emotional instability, risk to yourself. I closed my eyes, anger burning hot and sharp now. How long do I have? A hearing is scheduled in 10 days. 10 days. That was how long it took to erase a lifetime of sanity. If you let someone else tell your story. Richard's voice softened. Elaine, this is where we stop playing defense. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a drawer and took out a box of old documents, canceled checks, loan agreements, emails, text messages, voicemails I had never deleted. Proof, not just of money, but of pattern, of manipulation, of pressure disguised as love. That night, I didn't cry. I organized. By morning, I had folders labeled by year, by request, by lie. I listened again to Andrew's old voicemails. Mom, we're desperate. Mom, please don't make this harder. Mom, you're the only one we can count on. Each one felt different now. Not please, hooks. 2 days later, Sarah called. A friend I hadn't spoken to in months. Elaine, she said quietly, I thought you should know. Melissa has been telling people you're unstable, that you're a danger to yourself. She even hinted you might need to be moved out of your home. I thanked her and hung up. Then I smiled, because now I knew exactly what they were planning, and I knew exactly how to stop them. The courtroom smelled like old wood and disinfectant. I sat alone at the table reserved for respondents, hands folded, posture straight. I wore a gray suit and minimal makeup. No trembling, no dramatics. Across the room, Andrew sat beside Melissa. She didn't look at me. Andrew did. His eyes were rimmed red, his face drawn into something rehearsed and hollow. He looked like a man playing a role he didn't fully understand. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I didn't feel fear, I felt clarity. Melissa's attorney spoke first. He painted a picture of concern, a mother slipping, financial decisions that didn't make sense, isolation, emotional volatility. Then Andrew testified. He talked about worry, about love, about how I had changed. He never mentioned the money. When it was my turn, Richard stood. Your Honor, he said calmly, we will show that this petition is not about protection. It is about control. He handed the clerk the first stack of documents, transaction records, forged signatures, estate amendments filed without consent. Melissa stiffened. Andrew stared at the table. Richard continued. This court will also hear recorded voicemails and read written requests showing a clear pattern of financial dependency and coercion. The judge's expression changed. Then it was my turn. I stood. My voice was steady. I spoke about years of giving, about believing love meant sacrifice, about slowly being excluded, dismissed, erased. I spoke about discovering my signature forged, about being called unstable only after I said no. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I let the facts speak. When the judge asked Andrew directly if he had authorized the estate changes, he hesitated. That hesitation was everything. The ruling was swift. Petition denied. Referral for investigation recommended. Andrew's face collapsed. Melissa stood abruptly, her mask finally cracking. As we left the courtroom, Andrew tried to follow me. Mom, please, this went too far. I stopped and turned. No, I said quietly. You went too far. I just stopped letting you. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, like a storm had passed. My phone buzzed. A message from Richard. They're done, Elaine. Legally and financially. You're safe. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands on the wheel, heart pounding. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next demand. I was free. And I wasn't finished yet. Because justice doesn't end when the truth comes out. It ends when the lesson sinks in. And theirs had only just begun. Freedom has a strange aftertaste. In the days after the hearing, my phone went silent. No calls, no messages, no sudden emergencies that only I could fix. The quiet felt unnatural at first, like living in a house after the power goes out, and you realize how much noise you were used to ignoring. I slept through the night for the first time in months, and then the guilt tried to crawl back in. It came in small thoughts, sneaky ones. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe Andrew really was overwhelmed. Maybe Melissa panicked. Maybe. That was when the certified letter arrived. I recognized the firm's name immediately. Andrew and Melissa's attorney. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it slowly. They were contesting the will, not quietly, not privately. They were alleging undue influence, claiming I had been manipulated by my lawyer, that I was retaliating emotionally, that I was acting out of spite. They wanted a judge to review everything again. I didn't feel panic. I felt insulted. I called Richard. They won't stop, I said. He exhaled slowly. No, because now it's not about money anymore. It's about pride. He explained what they were trying to do. If they could paint me as vindictive, unstable, manipulated, then everything I'd done could be questioned again. It was a long shot, but desperation makes people reckless. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Elaine, if this goes to trial, everything becomes public. I thought of church friends, neighbors, Andrew's childhood teachers, people who still asked about him with warm smiles. Are you ready for that? Richard asked. I looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I had peeled apples for Thanksgiving, waiting for people who never planned to show up. Yes, I said. I am. The deposition was scheduled for the following week. Melissa arrived, dressed for sympathy. Soft sweater, minimal makeup, eyes already shining as if she'd practiced in the mirror. Andrew looked worse, thinner, tired, angry in a way that had nowhere to go. They sat across from me, close enough that I could see the tension in Andrew's jaw when I refused to look at him. Their attorney started gently. Elaine, do you feel resentment toward your son? No, I said. I feel clarity. Melissa shifted. They asked about my finances, my decisions, my emotional state after David's death. Then Richard slid a folder across the table. Let's talk about Paris, he said. Melissa's head snapped up. Transaction records were read aloud. Dates, amounts, locations. Then the emails. Melissa, writing to a friend, joking about using my account, calling me old-fashioned, predictable, easy. Andrew flinched when those words were read. Finally, Richard played a voicemail. Melissa's voice filled the room. Elaine won't say no. She never does. We just have to push a little. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. The devastating kind. Andrew stared at the table like it might swallow him whole. Melissa opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. The deposition ended early. As they stood to leave, Melissa finally looked at me, her eyes sharp with something ugly. You didn't have to destroy us, she said under her breath. I met her gaze, calm. You destroyed yourselves, I said. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. That night, I received a call from someone I didn't expect. Andrew. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Mom, I didn't know about some of those emails. I closed my eyes. But you knew about the money. Silence. I'm tired, I said, and I'm done protecting you from the truth. I hung up before he could respond. But the quiet afterward wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. The backlash came swiftly. People I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions. Church acquaintances who smiled too brightly. Distant relatives who called just to check in. I became a story. Some believed me. Some didn't. Some wanted to believe the version where mother simply lost her way because it made them feel safer about their own families. Then the article came out. A local paper. Human interest section. The headline didn't use my name, but it didn't have to. A family torn apart by greed and control. It painted Andrew and Melissa as ambitious, struggling, burdened by an overbearing matriarch who couldn't let go. I stared at the screen. hands cold. Richard called within the hour. They leaked it, he said, trying to sway public opinion before the will hearing. What do? We let the truth catch up. 2 days later, the follow-up piece ran. Same paper, same section. This one included court records, forged signatures, denied conservatorship, financial exploitation flagged for investigation. The tone shifted, so did the comments. Andrew stopped answering calls. Melissa went silent online. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, someone knocked on my door. It was a woman in her early 40s, holding a folder to her chest like armor. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly. "My name is Julia. I'm Andrew's half-sister." The air left my lungs. Half-sister. She explained everything standing on my porch. Her mother, Andrew's father, an affair I had never known about, money paid quietly, promises broken. Andrew had known for years. Melissa had found out recently. They weren't just spending my money, they were covering up something else. Julia looked at me with sad, steady eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't come for money. I came because I couldn't let you keep being blamed for things you didn't do." She handed me the folder. Inside were documents, emails, proof, a hidden truth that reframed everything. I invited her in. As we sat at my kitchen table, the same one where so much had unraveled, I realized something profound. This was never just about betrayal. It was about lies, layered so deep they poisoned everyone who touched them. And now, the final layer was exposed. I didn't know yet how it would end. But I knew one thing with certainty. The reckoning was no longer just mine, and the next chapter would change everything. The truth has weight. Once it's placed on the table, it presses into every silence, every breath, until no one in the room can pretend it isn't there. Julia stayed for hours. She told me how she had grown up watching from the edges of Andrew's life, how her mother had accepted hush money instead of justice, how Andrew's father had demanded secrecy to protect his reputation, how Andrew had learned early that lies were easier than consequences, and how Melissa had discovered everything 2 years ago, not by accident, by digging. They needed leverage, and they found it. Melissa had realized that if the affair ever became public, Andrew's carefully polished image would collapse. His career, his social circle, his standing, everything he cared about. So they did what they'd always done. They took control. They used my money, not just for luxury, but to keep people quiet, to settle threats before they grew teeth, to pay for silence disguised as help. I felt sick listening to it, not because I was shocked, because it explained everything. The entitlement, the panic, the desperation to keep me compliant. They weren't afraid of losing money. They were afraid of exposure. Julia slid one last document across the table, an email chain between Melissa and Andrew. In it, Melissa wrote, "If your mother ever finds out about this, we're finished. She has morals. She won't protect us." Andrew's reply was short. "She'll never find out. She trusts me too much." That line hollowed something out in my chest. I thanked Julia for coming, for telling me the truth when no one else had. She hesitated by the door. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just didn't want you to be alone in this." After she left, I sat in the quiet house and stared at the wall. Trust. That was the real inheritance I'd given Andrew, and he'd spent it without hesitation. That evening, Richard came over in person. I showed him everything. He read quietly, carefully, then leaned back in his chair. "Elaine," he said, "this changes the board completely." "How?" He tapped the folder. "They're not just facing civil consequences anymore. This involves fraud, coercion, and potential obstruction. If this goes public through the right channels, they lose control of the narrative permanently." I thought of the article, the whispers, the people who had doubted me. What if I don't want revenge? I asked. What if I just want the truth known? Richard met my eyes. "In this case," he said, "those are the same thing." That night, I made a decision I had avoided for months. I wrote a statement, not emotional, not vindictive, just factual. I detailed the financial abuse, the forgery, the attempted conservatorship, the lies, and I attached proof. I didn't post it. I sent it to one person, Andrew's employer, and one more, the reporter who had written the first article. Then I went to bed, and slept deeply, knowing the silence I woke to would not last. The fallout was not immediate. It was worse. Andrew was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours. His company cited an internal review related to ethical concerns. No details, just distance. Melissa called me that night. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She cried. "You've ruined everything," she sobbed. "We were surviving. You didn't have to do this." I listened quietly. "You weren't surviving," I said. "You were consuming. There's a difference." Andrew got on the line then, his voice shaking with fury, barely held together. "You sent those documents." "Yes." "You knew what this would do to us." "I knew what you did to me," I replied. "And you didn't stop." He laughed bitterly. "You always think you're right." I closed my eyes. "No, Andrew. I finally stopped thinking you were." The second article ran 3 days later. This one had my name and the truth. It laid out the timeline, the financial exploitation, the attempted legal takeover, the hidden affair, carefully framed without sensationalism. Public opinion shifted like a tide. Sympathy evaporated. Andrew resigned before he could be fired. Melissa deleted her social media accounts. The will contest was withdrawn quietly the following week. They didn't apologize. They disappeared. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't chase after them. Instead, something unexpected happened. People started reaching out. Women, mothers, grandmothers. They told me their stories. Quiet exclusions, financial pressure, being labeled difficult when they set boundaries. I realized my story wasn't rare. It was just usually buried. One afternoon, I sat in my garden, hands in the soil, breathing in the clean air, when a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, written in Andrew's handwriting. "I finally understand what I lost." I folded it and placed it in a drawer. Understanding didn't rebuild trust. It didn't restore years, but it did close a door. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the sun set behind the trees. I wasn't triumphant. I was free. And the final chapter of my life was no longer being written by people who mistook my kindness for weakness. The reckoning had come, not with shouting, not with cruelty, but with truth. And it had changed everything. I thought the story was over. That was my mistake. 3 months passed. Quiet ones. The good kind. My mornings settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Coffee on the porch, long walks, evenings with a book instead of a knot in my chest. Then Richard called. "Elaine," he said, "I need you to sit down." I already was. "Andrew has filed for bankruptcy." I closed my eyes, absorbing the weight of it. Not relief, not satisfaction, just inevitability. "And," Richard continued, "there's more. He's contesting one last thing." "What now?" "He's claiming dependency, emotional and financial. He's asking the court to mandate mediation and temporary support." Support from me. My hands tightened around the phone. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you were his primary source of financial stability for over a decade." He's arguing expectation, reliance, harm caused by sudden withdrawal. I almost laughed. Almost. "So he wants the court to force me to resume enabling him." Richard's voice was careful. "It's a weak argument, but emotionally persuasive if mishandled, especially given his current state." I knew what that meant. Andrew would appear broken, remorseful, regretful, the prodigal son. And people love redemption stories more than they love accountability. The mediation was scheduled for the following week. I didn't sleep the night before. Not from fear, from something closer to grief. I remembered Andrew as a teenager, slumped at the kitchen counter, frustrated with homework. I remembered the pride in his voice when he got his first job. The way he used to say, "Mom, I'll take care of you someday." I wondered when that promise had quietly reversed. The mediation room was small, neutral, designed to make conflict feel polite. Andrew sat across from me. He looked smaller, older, worn down. For a moment, my heart betrayed me. Then he spoke. "You pulled everything out from under me," he said softly. "I didn't land on my feet like you thought I would." I met his eyes. "I didn't pull anything away that wasn't mine to begin with." He swallowed. "I made mistakes. I know that now. But I'm still your son." "Yes," I said, "and I am still your mother." But motherhood does not mean self-destruction. The mediator shifted uncomfortably. Andrew's voice cracked. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't changed. If you just talked to me first. I leaned forward. I did talk to you. Many times. You just didn't listen, because talking to me never cost you anything. Silence filled the room. Then Andrew said the sentence that sealed everything. I don't know how to survive without you. That was the truth. And also, the problem. I straightened. Then you won't survive as long as you keep expecting me to do it for you. Richard slid the final document across the table. A formal declaration. No financial obligation. No emotional leverage. No further contact without consent. Andrew stared at it. You're really doing this? I nodded once. This is the last gift I can give you. Consequences. He didn't sign, but he didn't fight it either. When the session ended, he stood awkwardly, as if waiting for permission to speak again. I gathered my things. Goodbye, Andrew. I walked out without looking back. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was abandoning him. I felt like I was finally letting him go. The final closure didn't come with drama. It came with distance. Andrew moved out of state. I heard that through someone else. Melissa filed for divorce shortly after. That, too, reached me secondhand. I wasn't asked for advice. I wasn't asked for help. And I didn't offer. My lawyer confirmed everything in writing. My estate locked. My wishes clear. My future protected. I framed the final document and placed it in the drawer where I once kept birthday cards and school photos. Not out of bitterness. Out of respect for the woman I had become. Life grew quieter. Fuller. I hosted Thanksgiving again the following year. Not out of tradition, but choice. Friends, neighbors, people who came because they wanted to be there. At the end of the night, as I cleared the table, one of the women touched my arm. You seem lighter, she said. I smiled. I am. Some nights, I still think about Andrew. Not with anger, with acceptance. Loving someone doesn't mean rescuing them forever. Sometimes it means stepping back far enough for them to see the damage they caused. I planted a new tree in the yard that spring. Its roots were fragile at first, but I tended it carefully. Not too much water, not too little. Enough to let it grow strong on its own. That felt symbolic. I am not a victim. I am not a villain. I am a woman who chose herself, after decades of being told that love meant endurance. If you're listening to this and something in my story feels familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are allowed to draw boundaries. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to stop paying the price for other people's choices. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like peace. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video. Share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. And if you want more stories about truth, karma, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your life, subscribe to this channel because you're not alone. And it's never too late to choose yourself.